PIXAR, a studio that changed animation as we know it, with films like the Toy Story series, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Up, WALL-E, many other great features. But there is one Pixar film they did after the first Toy Story that they never seem to really acknowledge.
Those were up, and they did.
We're smart, and my...
He told me enough.
No, I. Here's Chuck.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review, and this review is going to be for a Pixar film. And it was the second one they did after Toy Story. It's one they never talk about, or never seem to remember they really did. They used to back then, but nowadays they just kind of really don't. And this one is going to be for 1998's A Bug's Life, which was directed by John Lasseter, the director of Toy Story, and was co-directed by Andrew Stanton, who later went on directed Finding Nemo and WALL-E. And, now, what's the plot of this one? Well, it takes place at an annual pace. A huge colony of ants that every year is forced to collect every piece of food that grows on their island for a group of menacing grasshoppers. But that all changes when one misfit inventor ant named Flick accidentally knocks over the offering pile, thus forcing the grasshoppers, his leader Hopper, to force the ants to redo their gathering of food. And despite the fact that his friends the fact that the whole colony does not believe in him and is desperate to help save the colony, Flick now decides to volunteer to go out into the world and search for a group of warrior bugs to fight off the grasshoppers. Instead, he's led to believe that these circus performers, because they get in a fight with a bunch of flies, are the warriors. But then he finds out they're not. But then when the grasshoppers return and take control of the island, Flick and the circus warriors that he's now stuck with have to prove themselves true heroes before it's all too late. Yeah, so how is this made? Well, as it's kind of revealed in the teaser for WALL-E, how other films from Pixar after Toy Story 1 and 2 got made, along with this one. Well, it was during the summer of 1994, and Disney saw Toy Story was going to be a huge success, and it's kind of obvious they were like, Pixar, because you made a great success for us already, Toy Story is now going to be a big success for us because we can already tell the story. Make another feature for us so we can keep up that success. And Pixar's story department began turning their thoughts on their next film at this lunch at a cafe, as it's revealed in the teaser of WALL-E if you want to go check that out. The storyline for A Bug's Life, it originated, like I've already said, from a lunchtime conversation between some people at the time, John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter, and the late Joe Raft, rest in peace. The studio, who Joan Raft actually also did voice two characters in the Toy Story films. He voiced the binoculars toy in the first Toy Story film, I think also in the second one as well, and also voiced that penguin Wheezy in Toy Story 2, with the broken squeaker. And the studio's head story team and other ideas were also invented around that lunch too, like Monsters Inc. for 2001, Finding Nemo for 2003, which Andrew Stanton would direct, and Pete Docter directed Monsters Inc. And then WALL-E, Andrew Stanton also directed that one. Those three, along with A Bug's Life, were conceived at the lunch. Lasseter and his story team had already been drawn to the idea of insects serving as characters. Like toys, like insects were to them within the reach of computer animation back then because of their relatively simple services. And Stanton and Raft wondered whether they could have a starting point in Aesop's fable like the ant and the grasshopper. And Walt Disney, around 1934, around the time they had just begun, Walt produced his own version with this cheerier ending, literally in 1934 before Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs released. In addition, Walt Disney Feature Animation even considered producing a feature film off that short in the late 1980s, which would be called Army Ants. Well, technically speaking, it wasn't based off that short. It was just an original idea. It centered around a pacifist ant living in a militaristic colony, but it never fully martialized. Well, we all know that went to DreamWorks. As Stanton and Ralph discussed the adaptation, they read off scenarios and storylines spreading from their premise. Lasseter liked the idea of offering some suggestions. The concept simmered until early 1995 when the team began work on the second film in earnest. And during an early test screening for Toy Story in San Rafael in June 1995, they pitched the film to Disney CEO Michael Eisner. Eisner thought the idea was fine, and they submitted treatment in Disney in early July under the title Bugs, at the time just called Bugs. Disney approved the treatment and gave notice on July 7th that it was exercising the option of a second film under the original 1991 agreement with Disney and Pixar. Lasseter assigned the co-direction to Andrew Stanton, and both worked well together and had similar sensibilities. And Lasseter realized that working on a computer-animated feature as a sole director was dangerous while the production of Toy Story was in the process. And Lasseter believed it would release stress and that the role would groom Stanton for having his own position as a lead director. And we all know the fable that they kind of took inspiration from, The Ant and the Grasshopper. In that story, there's this grasshopper that kind of slacks off in the spring and summer making music, doesn't really bother to gather food, thinks there's enough time. And then, of course, while on the other hand, this colony of ants is putting food away for the winter because they're prepared. Then winter comes too quickly. The grasshopper gets hungry and begs the ants for food. But the ants are like, no, get out of here. Turn them away, and we think we're led to believe the grasshopper pretty much dies. That's how that story goes. And Andrew Stanton and Joe Raft hit on the notion where if there was an alternate version of the story, the grasshopper just steals the food. And that began the story for the grasshopper villains. And after Stanton had completed a draft of the script, he came to doubt one of the story's main pillars, the circus bugs that come to the colony to cheat on the ants would instead stay and fight. He thought the circus bugs were unlikable characters as liars, it was unrealistic for them to undergo a complete personality change, and no particular good reason existed for the circus bugs to stay in this version with the ant colony during the second act. The film was already far along, and Stanton concluded the story needed a different approach. So Stanton took one of the earliest circus bugs characters, Red the Red Ants, and got changed into the character Flick. The circus bugs were no longer out to cheat the colony, they'd be embroiled in a comic misunderstanding as to why Flick was recruiting them. Lasseter agreed to this new approach, and comedy writers Donald McEntry and Bob Shaw spent this few months working on further polishing with Stanton. The characters Tuck and Roll, the two roly-polies, the mime-like cannonball roly-polies, were inspired by a drawing that Stanton did of two bugs fighting while he was in second grade. And we all know the film Army Ants. Jeffrey Katzenberg worked at Disney for the time being, but then he left around the time Toy Story was released. And Army Ants went to DreamWorks, and that film got called Ants, which we all know. And I already reviewed it. So after A Bug's Life was shot and marketed, A Bug's Life would premiere at the El Capitan Theater in Los Angeles on November 14th, 1998. And was released in the United States a month after Ants on November 25th, 1998. And and it also got positive reviews, not as much as Toy Story though, and it became a commercial success, not as successful as Toy Story. And it grossed $363 million at the box office. And get this, guys. Around the time DVD was being invented, back then 90s people had, for closest thing to DVDs was Laserdiscs and VHS. And that was it for home media. And they had to wait a long time for it to come out on home media. But DVD got invented around this time, and so the first film to be digitally transferred, frame by frame and released on DVD, was actually A Bug's Life. Believe it or not. And it's gotten released multiple times on home video. Now, as for my reaction, sorry this took so long, guys. Cat kind of came in here. As for my reaction, I grew up with Pixar as a child, you all know, and I did watch this film as a kid a lot on VHS, as an infant during a lot of tutoring sessions. I never really called it one of my favorites, per se. I was more into Toy Story 1 and 2, I was more into Monsters Inc., I was more into Finding Nemo, I was more into The Incredibles during the infant years. A Bug's Life, one of those films, that was just kind of there. And as I got older, I kind of started losing a lot of memory of it. I was more familiar with the short Jerry's Game that was before the film, The Jury's Game short I liked. That was an enjoyable short. I remember that short. But A Bug's Life as a whole, it was just one of those Pixar films that was just there. It was just one of those infant times there. It's definitely not one of Pixar's worst. It's still pretty good, but I'm still one of the people that prefers Ants, and they're going to get to why in a bit. And I can understand why it's kind of been long forgotten about. I feel like it was because Toy Story was already going to be Disney already predicted Toy Story was going to be a successful hit once it released after Pixar had finished it, and Disney probably clearly demanded Pixar do another film right now at this moment as soon as Toy Story released, as soon as possible. Like this even like came out around the same time as Ants, like a month after Ants. Some people think Ants ripped off of Bug's Life, but Bug's Life technically came out after Ants. And I always prefer Ants more than this. And some do call Bug's Life overrated, but I wouldn't really call it overrated because it's a Pixar film no one remembers. Really. So I wouldn't really necessarily say it's overrated. It's pretty much this kid-friendly version of the film Seven Samurai, or a kid-friendly version of The Magnificent Seven, for those more familiar with Westerns. Pixar, we all know, they went on to do many great films after Toy Story 1 and 2, and I love nearly all the ones they did in the 2000s. Well, except for Cars, not a big fan of Cars. Nearly all of them in the 2000s had great stories and wonderful, funny characters. I was always a huge fan of Toy Story, loved the plot of the film where two toys were separated from their owner, ended up at that evil, nasty toy abuser, turning toys into nasty-looking things, and then toys... Yeah, when I saw Toy Story, Toy Story was a huge hit at the box office. That Pixar went and started making more films. They got a bunch of ideas. One of them was actually this film about bugs, and the idea literally came around 1995. Along with Monsters Inc.'s idea, Finding Nemo's idea, Wall-E's idea. Then, some people say, DreamWorks copied this movie, and they made a film about ants, and it's also Bug's Life. It's the same premise. Well, and they say it's the same movie. I disagree with that. They're not really the same movie. Really not. It's Ants is about a guy who just gets bored of being a worker ant, tries to join the army to get out of it, and then, because he wants to also meet this princess, and he returns from that mission, and then he ends up pretty much kidnapping the princess, and they run away from the island. The whole movie. That's what it's about. Bug's Life is about these ants that have to get food for grasshoppers, and this bug goes off to find warrior bugs, and immediately and he's only gone for the movie from the island for a brief bit. And he comes back, and the rest of the movie is mostly him on the island. Most of the movie in Ants is this lead ant and the princess at this place called Insectopia. So they're not the same movie. They're different. I don't know why people think it's the same movie just because they're about ants. Ants is mostly about ants. Bug's Life is about bugs. Ants is also with tones. Ants is really dark, more adult, and the CGI is very lack. A Bug's Life can be dark, tries to be dark, but it's mostly the kids' film. Ants is mostly the one for adults. Because DreamWorks actually sometimes tries to be adults. A Bug's Life does cobble together some nice animation, I will admit. And there's some good voice actors in here. Some of them are long gone, and rest in peace. And they're ones a lot of 90s people grew up with. And the premise, it's fine. The concept is actually fine. The film flies through its 95-minute runtime pretty quick. And the score, I will admit, is pretty solid, especially from Randy Newman, especially the opening score. Na 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 na. Which is probably one of Pixar's most memorable scores. And when it comes to the character Flick, I will admit, Dave Foley's actually good in the role of Flick, and does give a pretty good voice performance of the character. And some other noteworthy members of the voice cast do pretty solid, especially Julia Louis-Dreyfus as the princess, who some of you are familiar with from Seinfeld and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, where she's one of the French neighbors that repeatedly is often a victim of Griswold's Christmas decoration incidents. You even got, around the time, Hayden Panettiere from the Scream film, newer Scream films, very small around the time this movie came out as the character of Dot. Recently, Hayden just came back and unfortunately was in the shitty Scream 6. You also got Bonnie Hunt as one of the circus bugs, Rosie, who also later went on and did some other Pixar films, like the Cars series, Toy Story 3 and 4, and of course a brief bit in Monsters, Inc. And of course a frequent Pixar collaborator, John Ratzenberger, who is often in every single Pixar film, I think except for one, where you are familiar with him as Ham, familiar with him as the Snow Monster, the Swarm of Fish from Finding Nemo, the Underminer, almost every single Pixar film he's been in. Every one of them. It's one of the studios' best cast for many 90s kids and many people who grew up in the 90s. We all know this started off with one of Aesop's famous fables in 1934, and then that got short in 1994. It was a Silly Symphony short called The Grasshopper and the Ants, and it told the story of this lazy grasshopper, fiddled his summer living in the moment, while his neighbor ant works tirelessly and squirrel away massive amounts of food in the winter for months. Then the cold finally arrives, and the starving grasshopper gets reminded of his laziness and lack of preparation by the ant queen, but the ant queen allows him to stay in the short with the colony if he plays his fiddle, in a sense, and it works, since working for the food and warmth he'll be provided. And well, unlike that fable, where the Aesop fable, the ants refuse him food and he pretty much dies, we can all tell, the Silly Symphony short goes a little more lighthearted with the ending. And this movie's kind of a different take on both of those. Where the grasshopper this time, it's a swarm of grasshoppers, they're demanding food be prepped for them, and their leader, and the ants are pretty much the slaves of them in this version of it. It's filmed in brilliant, colorful computer animation. It's very detailed, realistic. It clearly shows this bug's world from their point of view. The story gets full of adventure, where our lead protagonist Flick is running into the flea circus of the ants, trying to defend themselves from the grasshoppers because he confuses them for warriors when he saw them fighting a bunch of flies that were messing around with them. The movie is filled with comedy, and you definitely gotta watch the film to appreciate the bug humor, of course, and it's typical for a Disney animated film that the filmmakers make the ladybug character a guy in the story, which I will admit is the funniest gag of the circus bugs and Bugs Direction, where we first meet the ladybug character because all these flies think the ladybug's a girl, and the ladybug goes up to them like, so you think being a ladybug makes me a girl, hey? Which I will admit is a funny intro to the character. And the art direction stylizes the world in rural insects subtly but surely, and there's definitely no evidence of human civilization here. Most of the whole entire cast is just bugs, and that's it. That was beautifully done as well. Knights do like the courage decision to kind of avoid the sophistication when designing the insects themselves. Exactly the robotic design one would expect of creatures. They move with the minimum of squash and stretch. But they don't really lack any. They're not really lacking in humanity, and the visuals also do deserve some praise. And it's a 96-minute film. Like that beside, though, on the more mixed side of things, because this is going to be a little different from the reviews I usually do, where I mention the good and bad qualities. It's going to be a more mixed one because it's decently fine film. It's not one of Pixar's worst, but I'm more mixed on it a little bit at times. Like, it's a 96-minute film that seems like it wants to be 3 hours in length. It gets wrenched out of shape. It sometimes does feel like a mess at times when it tries to do that. Like, it tries to do so many contradictory things. It's difficult to know where to really begin. Like, even though it's called The Bug's Life and it's about a bunch of bugs, I feel like this movie would work better as called An Ant's Life, because most of the bugs that get focused in this movie are pretty much ants. Like, the film is literally about a clumsy, hated ant who can't stand the heat of fellow ants or being oppressed by grasshoppers. Then the grasshoppers usually come once a year to eat the food which ants have picked through the year. And one day, like, Flick's accident, then of course our clumsy ant accidentally drops all the food collected for the leader grasshopper, who's named Hopper. And he's now the enemy of the ant hole because now the ants literally have to pick twice the resource of food for the grasshoppers. Then the clumsy ant comes up with this great idea, get help from bigger bugs to help them stand up for themselves. The queen thinks it's a ridiculous idea because they don't leave the islands, because of all the other dangerous stuff that happens. But of course, the ants send him away anyway because they don't want him to screw up another offering. Unexpectedly, the clumsy ant succeeds his mission, does come back with a bunch of bugs who seem strong enough, but then the guys appear to be a bunch of circus clowns and the chaos begins. And now, I think one of the reasons it's one of the least enjoyable of the 8 out of 10s Pixar does is because, well, there are some other things I have a problem with, like one of the cliches I'll get to in a bit, but the first one I have a problem with in this movie, the ants, except for the lead protagonist, and the kid character, and the queen. The rest of the ants, in the exception of those 3 of the ant characters, nearly all of the ants in this movie are assholes. And I will explain all. Now, it's not like as in Shark Tale, where there's barely any likable characters, and the lead is an unlikable douchebag. A Bug's Life, the main character, regardless of if the asshole ants think he's a screw-up, is actually a likable lead character. One which viewers can root for. At least. So there's at least 3 characters of the ants you can like. Literally, the reason why the ants are... Now let's explain why the ants are assholes. And this is how the movie starts. We see a small island with a large tree, and Randy Newman's iconic score plays, which was a little bit more memorable than the film itself. A colony of ants, they're preparing food for grasshoppers, and the ants are working, and one of them stands out is our clumsy ant that's named Flick, who has this thing with inventing new things for the colony to reduce labor, but instead the ideas get often shut down and shunned by the colony because they've caused a lot of trouble for them, and they feel the old-fashioned way of preparing for the grasshoppers' offering is the only way they can do things. And the first time we see our character Flick, the whole lead ant council already establishes themselves as assholes because when Flick does invent this telescope, one of them just walks up, this shorter one walks up, snatches it, throws it away, yells in his face to get lost, which pretty much already establishes them as great characters. Yeah, already establishing them as characters I can like. It's great news. But the only one that does seem to actually believe in Flick is the young princess in the colony who was named Dot. And there's it's secretly, Flick is literally attracted to the princess, soon to be Queen Ada, who's next in line for the throne. And often throughout the movie, even she can barely tolerate Flick. So it just makes their romance just kind of forced. And her warming up to Flick just feels kind of lazily developed. Because in her first scenes, even she's impatient with Flick's screw-ups. So yeah, and then the scene after we get introduced to our ant characters, the next scene where Flick has to try to put away the machine that he invented that was throwing the grain in his intro scene. It's one of the few scenes in the movie where it does feel Pixar-like, and it's when Flick and Dot first interact. And it's Flick can't find a seed because of the heavy equipment he's wearing, so he gives her this rock and tells her to pretend it's a seed, and a seed takes time to grow. And I will admit, that part's easily my favorite part of the film, and it's definitely one of the best 90s advices to a lot of kids can deal with. And now that I do think about it, the best moments are easily the scenes between those two. I would have rather those two had been the leading ant duo in this film, not Flick and the character of Ada, because Flick and Ada's scenes together I don't think are interesting. The romance feels forced. And because Ada's kind of irritating in her first scenes, so I feel the Flick and Dot scenes are done better, and I wish the leading ant duo was them instead. There was no romance in this film. I don't think we even needed a romance subplot to begin with. And then our grasshopper, and then once another problem I have is the grasshoppers, and now let's explain the grasshoppers part. It's after that scene with Flick and Dot, the grasshoppers are getting introduced in this scene. The grasshoppers start to arrive, approaches, and the colony now has to head back down to the anthill. and wait for the grasshoppers to eat the offering, and then and then leave. And so Flick has to go back to the colony with them, but he forgets to put away his machine. He's still stuck wearing it, so this is the unfortunate side. He's the last one to put the items on the offering stone. And so because he forgot to turn off his machine, the machine then triggers once he throws it to the side, and it causes the whole offering to collapse, and it all spills into the stream of the little water that's left. And so Flick does try to stop it from happening, but it's too late, and he's forced to try to run back to warn the colony about what happened to the offering. The grasshoppers arrive, and as the colony's waiting, Flick's trying to explain what happened, but Ada pretty much tells him to be quiet, even though it could be kind of important news that's going to become important, because the grasshoppers, obviously, they find nothing. And Ada starts to get very furious with Flick, and before Flick can even explain anything, the grasshoppers break into the anthill, and then we get introduced to our leader of the grasshoppers, Hopper. And I'll get to his, now the problem with this guy, some people call him an underrated Pixar villain, but I disagree with that. Because I'll say the one thing I have a problem with first. He's voiced by an actor I hate. And that, of course, you all know, as I call this guy now, because Kevin Disgracey. And we'll get to that stuff later. But now our Kevin Disgracey character demands the offering be replenished by the fall season. And it gives them no time to gather food for themselves. And of course, he decides to terrorize Dots with this crazy rabbit pet he has. But Flick comes forward and tries to defend her. And this makes Hopper mad. So Hopper demands the offering be doubled because of Flick's trying to stand up to him. And even during the meeting, Hopper also has this dim-witted brother who, I will admit, just is also not really that interesting of a character, because he's just kind of the typical dim-witted sidekick who kind of infuriates the lead antagonist a lot. And during a scene where he tries to reveal why Hopper has that scratch on his eye is because Hopper encountered a bird, and so Hopper has been afraid of birds ever since. And when Bolt tries to explain the whole process, Hopper literally tells his bird to shut up. And then so, after Hopper's first scene, the grasshoppers leave the island, and they're going to be back when the last leaf falls. And so now the colony is trying to punish Flick right here. And they're trying to come up with punishments for him. And because all their last attempts have all backfired, Flick then, while they're convening with what to do with Flick comes up with this new idea where the colony can find the bigger bugs to help them defend the colony, and they scare off the grasshoppers from ever returning. And then the others think it's a bad idea though, but Flick volunteers to look. And they think his search will take a long time, and think Flick will never come back from this search. The council decides to actually accept Flick's request, believing that he'll keep out of the way for their next offering. And this right here is just where the movie also goes downhill, because we all know what this movie does get criticism for. It's the liar revealed cliche, and it's where the well-known liar revealed part of the story happens. But the characters that are also make the movie entertaining enter here, and they're the circus bucks. They do stick out individually from one another, and even share some in-depth and top-notch performances. And also, and we also get the funny ladybug character that I've already talked about, and favorite scene of their introduction is when he's yelling at the flies. I think is a girl. Like A Bug's Life, like Toy Story and Monsters Inc., they're a fairly simple idea, but unlike the other Pixar films, it misses a vital element: its identification with the audience. In Toy Story, we identified with the story easily, when we were all kids and we all had toys that we played with similarly. That story works because it played with that idea. Then Monsters Inc., the idea of monsters is played upon. All children at one time or another are scared of monsters under the bed, and they present us the monster side of the story. And Monsters Inc. can be enjoyed by both children and adults. And before Monsters Inc., we had A Bug's Life. There's no identification here. Like, how many of us have been bugs before? Like, we've seen bugs, we've never been bugs. But maybe on a more emotional level, we can identify with Flick the Ant, but on a visible basis, most of us cannot really not. It's like, there's just no fun in this storyline. And then the rest of the movie goes, is like the Lie Revealed story. Let's talk about the way it does Lie Revealed. And this is the reason why everyone has a problem with Bug's Life. It's exactly how they do it. And they even reasonably hate this part of the story for a lot of good reasons. How does the whole Lie Reveal thing go? The most obvious way possible, because Flick finds the circus bugs. He thinks they're warriors because they had to defend themselves from flies. And so the circus bugs think Flick is a new manager for a new circus, and so they go with him. And then, once they get back to Ant Island, the circus bugs find out that they have to actually kill a bunch of grasshoppers. And so the circus bugs then flee, and they reveal to Flick they're not warriors. And so Flick is reasonably shocked, and the circus bugs try to leave because they don't want to murder grasshoppers. And they thought they were being called for another circus. But then, as they're trying to leave, a bird then appears, tries to kill Dot, who is following them, and the circus bugs go back to save Dot, and then Flick devises a new plan. Instead of fighting grasshoppers, to keep them out of that plan, they will instead build a bird that will scare away Hopper, because they realize Hopper's afraid of birds. And then, once the bird is built, Flick will actually help them flee the colony so they don't have to get involved in any messes, and they don't have to fight anybody. But over time, like, the circus bugs do warm up to the other ants, right here. And they decide that they actually don't want to leave, and they actually want to stay, because the ants are actually admiring their fake warrior behavior, and most of the time the circus bugs never got any success or applause from anyone, and this is the first time they're getting any admiration. So now they actually feel comfortable on the island for a little while longer. And this right here is where the Lie Revealed moment happens. Like, before that, like, I still have problems with the other bits of the story. Like, during that part, Ada does warm up the Flick, and honestly, their scenes are just not memorable. Really, like, because most of the time we saw Ada just being over-exaggerating, annoying, and often also, much like the other ants of this movie, just rude. Also one of the ants that's rude towards Flick in the first bit. And now suddenly, because after the bird scene, she does finally start to warm up to Flick, and you just don't really feel invested. It's like Pixar just wanted a romance story. We did not need a romance story in here at all. It's because they just wanted something to do with the Ada character and just wanted to make her feel like a useful character to this story. And it just really does not work for this. Like, so, because the circus bugs now don't want to leave, they continue the ruse of being warriors so they can keep getting the attention of the ants. And of course, after the bird is built, it's constructed from sticks and leaves. And as that night they're preparing for the grasshoppers to arrive, the ants think it's the grasshoppers, so they give the signal and they get ready to launch the bird, but it's the circus bugs' former master, the John Ratzenberg character in this one, the flea, that fired them. Now the flea, because of that one stunt that got the fly's attention, the flea now has arrived and he wants the circus bugs back with him. Now, after he just recently fired them. Turns out the firing stunt got them publicity, and now he wants them back again for more, because his greedy ass wants more money. And so, after this reveal, the ants are angered at Flick's deception. It goes exactly like every single Liar Revealed scene possible. All the time. And it's also hypocritical. I'll get to that stuff later. The ants banish him, and they even try to pull together enough food for a new offering for the grasshoppers, but they fail to do so. Before I get to how the rest of it goes, yeah, like I've already mentioned, guys, I hate Liar Revealed. And how this movie does it, though, it's easily the worst example of it possible, because the reason why it's stupid and done is because it was Ada's hypocritical idea of finding bugs, because her and the ants wanted to get rid of Flick. So, technically speaking, they have no reason to be mad at Flick at all, because it's technically all of their faults this happened. And they don't even try to reveal that it was all just to get rid of Flick at all. They're too hypocritical to do that. They don't want to admit it to Flick. It's like the writers just kind of forgot about this scene, and they just wanted a third act breakup because they just wanted to add some more drama. And this just made me hate the colony even more, because finding bugs was their idea, because they needed Flick out of Dodge. And they don't even bother coming clean about that. They actually try to act like the ant colony is innocent in the whole thing. So, there was no reason to do a lie reveal thing here. At all. And this was easily the worst scene in the whole film. And then, of course, the grasshoppers predictably discover a meager offering upon their arrival, and predictably, they take control of the ant colony, and they eat the ants' winter store of food. And this scene literally tries to make you feel bad for the ants, but in all honesty, after how rude just about exception of 2 of them, every single one of them has been towards Flick, why should, me included, even feel sorry for any of these assholes? They treat Flick like trash for the dumbest reasons possible. Like who the hell put a food offering near a cliff? So that's also your fault as well. You could have put it near the grass or put it near the anthill. They stupidly put it near a cliff. So losing that offering was your fault as well for putting it in a stupid spot. And ever think maybe Flick's inventions backfire because you guys are there at the worst possible time? So yeah, they're assholes to Flick for 0 good reason. They banished him for something that was their fault too. And just as the bird was already a useful idea, so why should I even be feeling sorry for these guys? After they banished Flick, and after just their first scenes of the movie, I was already just starting to honestly root for the grasshoppers, despite one of them being voiced by an actor I don't like, at this rate. At this rate, I was kind of on the grasshopper side. But then, the lead hopper plans to kill the queen. Dot overhears this, and she leaves to search for Flick and the circus bugs to convince them to return and save the colony to his original plan. Before Dot even finds them, in another predictable lie reveal moment, there's a scene where they try to chirp Flick saying that the circus life is not so bad. And I will admit that, at least over time, these bugs want nothing to do with Flick's plan, but after seeing all the temporary glory that it bought them, and renewed interest in publicity they got, they're now having his back, and honestly, I like that the circus bugs got a bit of character development here, where they wanted nothing to do with Flick at the time when they found out why they were there. But now, they're actually on Flick's side as the movie has progressed. And I'm like, Flick, why the heck would you be so upset about getting banished? These asshole ants, they never liked you one bit. One of the older ones even threw your telescope to the side in your first scene and told you to get lost. These ants just never liked you. And these circus people, they seem more respectful to you. It seems like the Flea character doesn't even seem to mind Flick pretty much going back with them. So honestly, it seems like you already seem like you'll have a better life with the circus. If I was Flick, I really would not give a fuck about being kicked out. Because I would rather live a circus life with the circus bugs that actually treat me with respect than live with a bunch of ants that constantly throw my inventions to the side, keep yelling at me to get lost, and just send me on a search just to get rid of me. Yeah, I would have went back with the circus bugs. I would not be sad. But then Dot returns, and of course, like Lie Revealed always does, Flick's hope gets renewed to return to use that bird he built with the rock thing, and with that rock seed thing again. And I always every time the Flick and Dot are on screen, it's where I wish the movie was about them instead. We saw more scenes of them instead of scenes with Flick and Ada. Those are the better done moments. Right there. So Flick's interest, obviously, predictably, Flick's hope gets renewed and he goes back to Ant Island to do the plan. And right here, guys, we have the finale. And it's not even an exciting finale either. And I'll explain why. So, yeah. We all know. They go back to Ant Island. They see the grasshoppers with the winter supply. They got all the winter supply. Now the ants are in prison. The circus crew now stage a pretend magic act to the grasshoppers so they can keep the grasshoppers fooled. And they have a queen bee volunteer for their act to secretly get her away from Hopper. And then Flick gets all of Dot's friends that were hiding in a clubhouse and the other kid ants to go launch the bird. When Hopper starts to finally get suspicious of the circus crew once they realize that the Queen disappeared, the bird launches, and it's why I barely take Hopper seriously as a villain, because when we first do see Hopper, first off, he's only in like the first and the third acts, so he's just a kind of a useless villain. But now when we get to there, once we get to the bird scene, he actually foolishly thinks the bird is real, even though any smart grasshopper would probably tell it's not because of the way it keeps flying. The plan does nearly work, and the head flea lights, but then of course, the flea comes back, lights the artificial bird on fire, and it gets crashed and it's revealed as a fake, and Hopper is furious, he takes Dot hostage again. It seems like he's about to kill Ada, which I honestly don't care about, which I wish did happen. But then Flick demands for Dot's release again, says the bird was his idea, and he stares at him with a fury in his eyes. And then, of course, when Hopper realizes this, he immediately has that crazy pet we saw in the first scene, literally attack the shit out of Flick quickly, but then it doesn't stop Flick from revealing Hopper's plan to kill the Queen. Then Hopper gives a bunch of insults to Flick and the other ants, but Flick stands up, defies Hopper, infuriates him even more. Then Hopper smacks Flick and is about to stomp at him like American History X. But then Ada stands in the way, and the entire colony of circus crew all stand up to the grasshoppers and drive them out of the colony. Then they drive away the grasshoppers, Flick and the ants snatch Hopper and take him to be launched into the air by a cannon, but sadly, because they're too slow to do it, they take too long, a rainstorm then happens, and it's like the writers just don't know how to dispose of Hopper, so they need to add more filler, a rainstorm, and that drop hits Flick, and when he does regain consciousness, Hopper frees himself from the cannon, he grabs Flick to have him murdered, and the circus crew try to rescue him, but the efforts fail because Hyde Pierce's character gets stuck in a tree because he's a stick bug, and I will admit that part did get a laugh out of me. Then the roly-polies grab Hopper's antennas, and he manages to outsmart them, but he does lose one of his antennas, and Ada then reclaims Flick, who instructs her to fly to the bird nest we saw earlier. When they do arrive back at the bird nest, Hopper prepares to strangle Flick, but then the bird awakens, and Hopper mistakes the real bird for another fake bird and taunts it. It attracts its attention and makes the bird pissed, so the grasshopper then quickly gets eaten by the bird and its chicks. Then we cut back to spring immediately. There's no real aftermath of this, we just go right back to spring. Flick got welcomed back to the colony, and now he and Ada are officially a couple, and Ada's now the queen, and the troop departs with the last grasshopper Molt, who is now suddenly redeemed. And also Dot is now the new princess, and the circus troupe departs, and Flick and Ada Dot watch from a tree root, and they bid farewell on a tree branch. And I don't like that Flick decides to actually stay with these ants. And the flea's like, sure you can't come with us, and Flick's like, my place is right here. No. You should not stay with these people after how they treated you. Yeah, the same ants that told you to get lost, threw your telescope to the side, sent you on a search just to get you out of their sight, and then when they found out they were circus bugs, banished you? No! Go with the circus bugs. Go with an actually good place. These ants are probably just going to go back to treating you like shit eventually. I wish he just went with the circus bugs, because these ants were complete assholes to him throughout this entire movie. And that's why I like ants better. And people are going to be mad I say that, but I like ants better. And that one, the plot feels more different, and it's not a lie-revealed story. Right there. It feels more original, it feels more simple, and the lead ant in Ants and the princess in Ants, they have better romance chemistry, and you can see why they'd fall in love. It feels done better there, okay? It's just a better done movie that way. And yeah, and it feels like it's just more exciting. And yeah, and the ants are not assholes in Ants, right? There's more likable characters in Ants. So yeah, there's my comparisons. Ants has a better story, better characters, no lie or reveal trash, and a more epic finale that knows how to dispose the antagonist, and it doesn't take a long-ass time to finally try to do so. Because of Bug's Life, it's like they can't figure out how they want to dispose of Hopper. And Gene Hackman actually appears in the whole entire movie, and it actually feels like a threat. Whereas Hopper is just gone for only appears the first and third acts, so I can't really take him seriously if he's only in those acts. Now, Bug's Life, it's not terrible, because there's still things I like about it, but it's definitely forgettable, and I can see why Pixar never remembers it. In the end, maybe A Bug's Life is still worth buying for those who still like it and remember it and want to know what they did right after Toy Story, but don't expect something like their other films afterwards when they really started to pick up better. Anyways, that's it for my view of A Bug's Life, and you're wondering how I'm going to rank A Bug's Life, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you are a Pixar fan and do want to see that one film from their golden age that you do personally enjoy and have fond memories of, then I guess watch and buy A Bug's Life, but don't expect a grand masterpiece for sure. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank A Bug's Life, I guess because of the stuff I do like here, I'll give Bug's Life an 8 out of 10. There we go, guys. That wraps up my review for A Bug's Life. Now you're wondering, what am I going to do after I edit this review? Well, because this review took a little too long, I'm going to try to be as short as I can, or try maybe be as little quick as I can for my next videos. And after I edit this review, I'm going to get ready to go and suffer through Night Swim. Yeah, that's going to be fun to do. I've already heard great things about it. But until then, guys, that will be it for this review. Thank y'all for watching. If you like this, want to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.